welcome to our final session of this series of Learning for Life as Health as a Human Right theme series. So thank you for being here. We're delighted that you're able to make it part of your day. I'm Tracy Bowman. As you know, I'm the Executive Director of Alumni Relations and a very proud UM alum. Delighted to always be here with you. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the University of Manitoba campuses are located on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories, we acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So housekeeping details, you're so good at getting your coffee and your water right away for those of you who are here. Those of you on Zoom, please go still grab your coffee and your water. That will be available to you, those of you who are here in person afterwards with some cookies. We are recording the session, as you know, because of our virtual participation. So this will go onto our Learning for Life YouTube channel, so you can watch it again and again. Please share with friends and family. So much great content is on that YouTube channel. And also a big thank you to our sponsor, IA Financial Group, one of the University of Manitoba's affinity partners, that does help to offset the cost for hosting this program. So let's get on with the speaker for today. So you are in for a real treat. I'm really delighted to introduce Dr. Robert Mizzi, who is a wonderful speaker, a wonderful person, but let me tell you about his research and what he does in his area of expertise. So Dr. Mizzi actually was a middle school teacher before going into academia. So he really does know all about from educating children to educating adults. He's originally from Northern Ontario, and he joined the Faculty of Education at the University of Manitoba in July 2013. So he is an associate professor in the faculty, but he's also a very prestigious Canada Research Chair in Queer Community and Diversity Education. He has over 200 publications and presentations, including articles published in the Journal of Homosexuality and the Journal of Studies in International Education. He's published 5 books, with the most recent being the Handbook of Adult and Continuing Education by Stylus and the American Association for Adult and Continuing Education. He's also the President Emeritus of the Canadian Association of Adult Education and is the current Editor-in-Chief of the Canadian Journal for the Study of Adult Education. He also, just last week, was inducted as a member of the Royal Society of Canada, which is the most prestigious organization in Canada for academics. So I think that deserves a round of applause because it's very, very impressive. And then my last point I wanted to mention, as I was mentioning to Robert, I've mentioned to you before that the president hosts What's the Big Idea podcast, and the November session is with none only than Dr. Mizzi. And so I really encourage you, I was late to the game with listening to podcasts myself, but you really do have to listen to this wonderful podcast. We now have 3 episodes, and as I mentioned, Dr. Mizzi is in conversation with President Benarosh for this month. So anyways, I'm going to now pass it over to you, Dr. Mizzi, to share your research. Thank you.
Thank you. It's so good to meet all of you virtually. Hello over there on Zoom, and hello to all of you in the room. It's been a pleasure to come back and speak with all of you, alumni and community members and friends. So this research today I'll be talking about is a new concept that's merging, that I'm trying to kind of advocate more for consideration within equity, diversity, and inclusion programs. So I thought I'd get rooted in the research and dig deep to try to think about how we could think about spatial justice differently, and as we move forward in our teaching and learning in our leading programs. So I first want to acknowledge that this is a research project that's been funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, as well as the Canada Research Chairs Program. So I'm very thankful to their support for this project. And I also want to acknowledge my colleagues, Dr. Ehsan Akbari, who is a collaborator on this project from the University of Regina, Dr. Tanaz Zagarian, our research associate from York University, and Chris Yent and Chris Campbell, PhD students in the Faculty of Education. inclusion here at the University of Manitoba. So I'm just thrilled that I'll be able, this is a team effort, and I'm here just representing their efforts and their voices as well in this work that I'll be sharing. Now, recently, within the past 10 years, I would say, there has been more of an emphasis on university and colleges, campuses across Canada to promote equity, diversity, and inclusion, largely because there's been widespread systematic and social barriers in place that have been limiting marginalized people from entering or succeeding in getting their degrees or their diplomas. And so in response to that, those struggles and those barriers, equity, diversity, and inclusion has come out as being a way to alleviate some of those issues, and so that we can have everyone can participate equally, fairly, respectfully, safely in their learning situations. And so what we have here is around the country, and there's 78% that I've seen of universities across Canada that have started to integrate EDI, equity, diversity, inclusion, whatever that looks like. Some add decolonization, some add justice, but I'll just say EDI in general, because that's what we're referring to at the moment at the University of Manitoba. And to try to at least create programs and create policies and awareness campaigns to try to encourage more people from diverse backgrounds to participate in university programs. And this is, my focus today will be focusing on students, but this is widespread, including faculty and staff, as a part of a larger conversation. So when we look at this EDI, what's really happening? We see it happening through policies, and there's a few examples that I've listed on the screen. We see them happening as well as programs, so you get task forces, anti-racism task forces, accessibility coordination committees. We see campaigns to promote Black Lives Matter. Our Indigenous people's concerns are woven throughout those different types of programs. So, I mean, there's different types of approaches. Professional development, of course, because of this historical, long-standing social and systemic exclusion that has taken place, we see professional development is necessary so that faculty and staff can participate in these types of awareness and become more astute to how they can increase commitment and increase awareness and adjust accordingly. So that's a rather significant part. And of course, there's research. We can't really start making changes until we understand what's the real situation. So research is about, finding, uncovering that data, that demographic data. How many Indigenous students here? How many women? How many people from the LGBT community? How many people who identify as racialized? How many have a disability? That type of data is really interesting, because then we can now start to create programs and policies that will cater to those groups. And of course, funding agencies now, such as the Canada Research Chair Program and Social Sciences Humanities Research Council, and here at the University of Manitoba, we're starting to look more about EDI in research. How is our research going to benefit marginalized communities, and how will we involve them as well as research, in the research, either as participants, research assistants, or community members? What is our strategies in our plan there? So you can imagine that everything here looks great, and that this is a good fit, widespread, comprehensive approach. But I kind of begin to wonder, this is where it gets to my questioning, whether we're at a stage where we can say everything's good and shall we just leave it as it is or just enhance where we are. And I'm saying no, because as EDI has now been unfolding on campuses, we're starting to see more about, is there a real commitment to systemic change? Is this just cosmetic diversity where you have a check mark about that person who's Black is in the room, so we've got that EDI quota met, or someone who's from the LGBTQ community, that check mark has been made. So we want to move beyond this kind of cosmetic approach, and we want to offer something that's more substantial, and offer something more long-term if we're really going to be committed to this EDI program. Because the problem at the moment, as EDI has been rolling out across campuses in Canada, is that there's a hollowing out, a reduction, and homogenization of social identities. And within the whole experience of that they've been oppressed groups and that they need to they need to fit within academic programs. We're not quite thinking about how academic programs should change to fit different social identities that come into our room. So we're not quite there yet. And so what I'm trying to think about is what we can do. And one of the areas is around spatial awareness. I don't see as much attention in EDI across the country about space, talking about the value of space, and how a space can construct people's lives. Now, space, what could we think? I'm not talking about out in outer space with the stars and the moons and everything. That's for someone else to kind of unravel. But for me, I'm talking about space in this room, space that we go onto campus, space, things that we interact with. So the environmental, social factors that influence people. So you walk in from outside, and perhaps you'll be looking at the posters in the room. You'll be looking at the different types of signage. You're looking at the directions in which you're being shuffled into. You'll be looking at just bulletin boards, different things around the space. And I argue that this is all teaching. This is all influencing. If you see a bulletin board that's full of white people and you come in as a black person coming into that room, how are you going to be able to connect to what that messaging about that blackboard is trying to send, those different types of posters, if you're not represented within that space? So I think space matters. I think space moving has an influence on people's identities, and it influences how they engage or interact with the community that's around them. So we have to look also at locations. So the virtual space is now becoming more prominent. So how is there inclusion or exclusion practices within this virtual space, as well as in the physical space as well? And I'll have some examples from my research moving forward to kind of elaborate this a little bit further for yourselves. And positionality, so your social position, how does that also shape your engagement? So if you're a white person walking into a certain room, you'll be treated differently than if you're an indigenous person. And so being aware of your own position, your own privilege, your own background is an important piece, because while you may be granted access to certain spaces and certain organizations and programs because of your background, others cannot be, just simply by the way they look, the way they talk, anything that they are just considered different. And I remember one day I was walking on campus, and I see a poster on a bulletin board that said, accent training. This is how you can acquire, if you enroll in a program, not at the University of Manitoba, it was a private company that somehow got their way into this poster, and they said that if you want to have a Canadian accent, to pay this fee and go through their program. And can you imagine, first of all, which one? Which accent? But moving forward, I mean, why can't we get our ears all tuned to different types of accents in the world so that we can at least, be able to comprehend each other? Why do other people have to change their accent to accommodate me? Why don't I just change the way that I am able to listen and engage? So I start thinking about space a little bit more concretely through these experiences and wonder, is space equitable? Is it relevant? Is it meaningful? Well, there's a scholar out of geography who says there is, and Edward Soja from 2008 published a book on spatial justice, and I really was drawn to some of Soja's work to think about what this means for education. But in his context, he talks about two types of justices. There is a distributive justice, where there's spatially fair, equitable access to opportunity and resources. So if you're someone in a wheelchair, can you enter the building just as you have? If you walked in, you can just walk right into the building without issue. Can someone with a wheelchair do the same thing? And so just a bit more awareness about how physical and virtual space they interact with social identities. Or is there also a space looking at procedural justice, the democratic process, the social activism into how space is constructed, designed, and planned? Is when you're building a new structure on campus, are all stakeholders consulted in that process? Or is it just a few who have certain expertise to share on that program? And I would argue that if there's any type of new buildings, new designs, anything that's happening, it needs to involve people from minoritized groups because they experience the same space differently than others. And we need to consider their views and how they're engaging if we're able to actually make any progress to make this space a very equitable and meaningful space for them as well. And the issue is that sometimes there are some informal agreements and there's traditions around designing of space that kind of removes those marginalized voices from default just because they've never been consulted with before. And I like to see that change. I like to see a little bit more community or consultation and involvement. So exploring justice in spatial justice in learning spaces. So what does that mean? It could be a variety of different things. So one of them is equity walk, which I'm seeing in the K-12 schools more and more, and I think there could be more of that done in the post-secondary education, where you take a walk through a building, and you take a look at what is being taught just through the space. What signs are you seeing? Where are you seeing some barriers? Where are you starting to recognize some issues where people may struggle with of some kind, whether it's the signage, the depictions, the design of the space, the actual building itself, the construction, the architecture, where there could be some difficulties. And that's where the equity walks come in really handy at just trying to do that really close-knit analytical work. And then there's also campus and organizational maps. So this is where you look at a map. So you look at a campus map. Perhaps most of you know the campus here, but perhaps if you're new here, you may want to see where this building is. I certainly had to look up this building. I hadn't been to this building before. It's a lovely building, and so I needed to just find my way to get to this map. So to this location. So I started thinking about, well, what's not on the map? What can be on the map? And when I was a visiting professor in Spain, I met with a group of community members, and I brought out their town map. And I said, where are you on this town map? And they couldn't answer the question, simply because they were members of the disability community, they were members of the LGBTQ community. There's quite a broad range, and they just couldn't find themselves. They see buildings like the city hall, they see parks, but they said, where am I in this map? So we start questioning maps as to whether, and as a communication and analytical device. And then there's spatial designs. So this is where you invite people to come in and take a look at how designed of space. So here you're all in rows, I can see, and such. And so is that allowing for people to engage in dialogue? I mean, in primary and secondary education, we've now recognized the value of groups. And in this space, we're still in rows, which is fine. I mean, it works for certain purposes, but it doesn't hurt to question. How does it alienate others? How does it prevent belonging? How does it affect otherness in different ways? So we just have to start questioning. And then what surrounds the buildings? What surrounds them? Are we looking at, I just noticed a new KFC opening up around campus. There's a new type of, there's Tim Hortons, of course, everywhere, and so there's different, I think it's important to look at not only the buildings itself, the campus itself, but what's happening around it, just to be aware of how that could be affecting people's lives. If they're always bombarded with, very capitalistic corporate structures, then, how do they start to value the smaller agency, the smaller companies, the smaller business and such, and how they have an important place in society. And then also looking at impact of space on learning and teaching. So what are the conditions and resources that shape learning and teaching practices? So how is the space working for you as an instructor, and how is the space working for you as a student? Are there limitations taking place? So important points from the literature is that there is a real lack of critical interrogation about how physical space shapes identity and campus experiences. There's been some consideration of people with disabilities, so we're starting to see more buildings being retrofitted accordingly due to accessibility legislation. However, and there is some new attention to space happening for trans and non-binary people to have more spaces for their bathroom so they can go safely to the bathroom. But that's just a couple of populations. We're not seeing a wider spread conversation around how physical space shapes identity and the campus experience. And also there's a call for more fair access to public spaces and equitable distribution of resources. So, for example, I had a participant who uses a wheelchair and she couldn't fit into her classroom. The wheelchair could not fit into the actual lecture hall, which is like this space. So she was pivoted into the closet, and then she had to just ask to listen to the lecture because she couldn't quite see the lecture, the professor, and she couldn't interact with other students because, again, the wheelchair could not fit outside the closet. So, into the classroom because of all the different other able bodies that were in the room. So this is where, it's a good example where we have to start questioning fair access of public spaces and getting access to learning spaces so that everyone has an equal chance. And then also space is becoming more prevalent around intersectionality and taking a look at more of a fulsome overview about how people have different marginalized identities, even within their own bodies. So you could be Black and queer, you could be Indigenous woman, you can be, there's many different types of intersectionality identities. So we need to consider their perspectives because they have a much more broader understanding of how the space could actually be adjusted or adapted for their needs because they're a member of so many communities. I see that as a very strengths approach to approaching intersectionality. So what I did, as I mentioned earlier, I had provided a list of different types of ways that you can analyze space. And one of the ways that I've tackled is campus maps. And I think that campus maps provides a real insightful area to just analyze, to communicate with participants about where they're seeing themselves. Just like I said to you that I tried this out in Spain, and then now I'm taking that here to another level with the University of Manitoba. And just look, the problem is that maps have been recognized as being very gendered. They're very, if you're in a space looking at a map and there's a lot of just issues where you'll see more male-dominant spaces being identified in the maps, that relegates women off, it marginalizes women, so therefore making it a very gendered map. Racist maps have been also constructed in a sense of having buildings recognized with settler views and people who have held racist attitudes in the past, but their names still remain on buildings, and that's always a sharp and stark reminder of colonialism and racism when you see a name of someone else who has contributed atrocities in the past, but they're being recognized by the university or other types of spaces too. And very heteronormative as well, where you'll see washrooms based within a very male-female gender binary, and you won't see spaces where the people can be coming together and feel safe because, again, of the nature of the space itself being rooted within heteronormativity or cisnormativity. So the study that I'm going to share with you today is to identify how physical space, to the extent in which campus geography both reflects and contributes to the experience of oppression among students. And so the questions that are I'm hoping to answer and to work through is how does the campus geography regulate social, political, and relational realities? And what kind of changes would multiply marginalized students make to campus maps? So again, the emphasis on multiply marginalized are very important here because it gets to, again, that broader understanding around intersectionality that always seems to be lacking. So this study is based at the University of Manitoba, Brandon University, and the University of Winnipeg as sites for inquiry. So right now, what I'm going to be sharing with you today, the lucky audience in the virtual and physical room, is the preliminary findings from this study. So no one else has heard this quite yet publicly, so you're in for a treat. And it's going to focus on the University of Manitoba study aspect. Right now, we're recruiting and working through the data from the Brandon University and the University of Winnipeg. The broader study also includes equity, diversity, inclusion practitioners, which I won't reveal some of that data. I'll just focus on the students. But the practitioners' views were very interesting, giving that broader political, social context of their universities, so that we can, so that when we're approaching working with students, we get to understand what some of the issues may be. And participants of this study needed to be students who experience multiple marginalization, so 2 or more based on gender, sexuality, ability, race, or indigeneity. And they experienced 2 interviews. My first interview is about just listening to their experiences about how space has interacted with their identities and their experience and their backgrounds. And then also looking at their second phase of the interview was about how would they change the campus map? Just what would they do? Can they just mark it up and just go really deep with that, or they can use some also geospatial technologies. We also provide that training and that awareness, as well as they can just do that. I'm old school, so I would just take the map and use markers everywhere and just change the buildings to think what I think could be useful for me. But so that's the question that we had, and we draw on this type of approach is rooted within the literature, looking at students' understandings of the maps, looking at the actual map that describes the landscapes, and the lived dimensions of their space, so their life experience. So it's kind of bringing in those different pieces, understandings, the landscapes, and as well as their life experiences. And then the recreation of the map is really seen as counter-narrative production, where you're trying to speak back to the powers, whoever created those maps, and provide another type of view for consideration. So again, this is just some of the preliminary research from the University of Manitoba site. And so here you'll see the different types of categories that of people have identified with. There was 14 participants out of the U of M, and the students, you will see that the numbers on the left column there do not add to 14. That's because, again, they're part of multiply marginalization, so there's multiple communities going on at play. And you'll see that we have a good range of undergrads to masters to PhD, and so forth, and the different campuses as well. So we were trying to be as broad as and inclusive as we can. So here we are. Something you might have seen already many times is the Fort Garry campus map. So I'll be focusing on this map today and not on Bannatyne. But you may see, this is some interesting aspects where you've got the parking and transportation are quite centered on the top part through the code. And then you've got lots of different spaces to park, so you can kind of get a sense, is this a car culture? I don't know, but if you're not, where are the bus stops? And thankfully there are some of the bus stops. You've got some congestion around the buildings in the lower right, and so right around here, and so you've got this kind of close community and such. And then you've got the EITC atrium as it being really kind of centered. There's actually an arrow there going down, and that's within the engineering building. So already there's some observations to be made, but what could we say differently about them as we move forward? So I presented this map to the students as in the phase 1 interview and said, what do you think about this map? Where do you see yourself in this map? So the first participant I want to introduce is someone who identifies as Indigenous female and a person with a disability. This is a person that uses a wheelchair. And she says, so when she engages the map, so she looked at the map, she looked at the student center, she says, when I use that student center, she says she gets stepped on because it's so crowded, and she's got a flag, but people step on her, and people step in front of her and step on her, and so she has to really avoid the crowded spaces. So when she saw, again, looking at the map and looking at the congestion of the different buildings, she was like, oh, I really, that's a lovely building. It's been really great for different reasons, and I'll go into that in a minute. But she said she's got to go hit it at certain times, or else she's afraid of how people are going to just not be aware of her in the space. And so she really wants the central administration to walk or roll with people who use those spaces and learn, because she's having a different experiences than people who do not use a wheelchair. So here you'll see that I've circled some parts where she has worked with the map, and her choice was to actually use the hearts and X's feature within Zoom. This interview was done over Zoom. So she really wanted to mark it up. So I kind of accentuated it through a circle. So she liked the certain aspect of the centralization of campus because she says she can access all the different buildings and the services all within one spot, generally speaking. And she really liked the library and that space there because it was very useful to to at least start building some relationships. Where she had problems was within this lower section here. It's largely because this is an unplowed area normally for people with disabilities with wheelchairs, so she always gets stuck, and she always comes back. I'm always stuck in the snow with this, and that's part of the campus. So she cannot engage in spaces in there because she doesn't know if she'll be able to actually get into the building or whether she'll just have to just somehow stick to the center part, which is to me troublesome because someone, again, should have access to all aspects of the campus. They shouldn't be relegated just on certain times of day or times of year. So that was something that was brought up. Interesting enough, with this participant, we probed her differently about her Indigenous identity, female identity, and disability identity. She felt very comfortable expressing her Indigenous identity on campus, and that she was in no problem with expressing and being a female in different spaces. She doesn't really study at night, so that was a concern for her too, was the lighting. She really sticks to daytime classes. For disability, though, this was the major push why she wanted to really engage with us around the space. So she had different types of recommendations around, we asked what would spatial justice look for you, what could we do? Marked time, so I have signs around the campus saying how long it takes to get from one place to the next. If you're a wheelchair user as opposed to someone who could just walk. Busy periods signage would be useful. The current ramp slopes are not helpful to to getting access into the building because it's too steep. So to lower that slope, to have more entrances that are wheelchair accessible. Certain buildings just have one entrance, and if it's blocked by snow, she can't get into it. Time of day, year are significant, as I explained. The bathrooms are too small for wheelchairs at times, and also the toilet rolls are inaccessible, that she can't reach it from the toilet. So little things like that you don't think about, but she brings that up. It's really important to her, and that is why it's important to consult with minoritized people whenever you're designing space, because they live it every day. They're going to be using it all the time, so they want to make sure that they have access to all in space, and that it's working for them and all the features of it. The next study the next participant is Indigenous and queer, and really kind of pointed out some of the issues, around the difficulties, and things that she didn't know. When she looked at the map, she said, "Oh, I didn't know that there are certain things." She felt the engineering building is traditionally not a safe space for women, for queer people, or for people who are outside the cis male. So yet, what was funny to me that she pointed out the engineering building, and that's what was the center stage within the current map system, is that EITC, and that's being highlighted. So to me, that's reinforcing a cis male dominance in a way that perhaps people have never considered before. And also thinking about, she said there was pocketed spaces. She really wants to see more signage to advertise where you could be if you're from a certain community. Because she says she walks through the hallways 5-6 times a day, so therefore wants to make sure that there's spaces where people can consider to visit and to find space, and to be who they want to be in their authentic selves. And there wasn't as much as that for this person. And also, this person emphasized the river as being a really wonderful space to have. Nice view, nice looking at that gives a sense of calmness. But the common space within the library, the science library, isn't quiet. So overlooking a nice quiet space, the river, and then you've got a lot of noise happening in the library that makes it really difficult to kind of, to lose yourself or to just be in a quiet space. So perhaps something around noise is something, the sensations that you experience, the smells, the noise, is what you see around here can also have an influence. And also news to this person that there was a National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, which is something we're very proud of, but we want to make sure there's more awareness to this. So the student here redesigned the map and really wanted to see more of a cultural space within the center or by the river. You can see there that people can kind of come to and just kind of realize that they can, how their learning journey is coming along. And this is something that's come across a few times where there was people who really wanted that cultural, quiet, green space, and they want to see more of that. So increased signage displaying diversity, more quiet and green spaces, more holistic wellness spaces so that you can go there for whatever needs you have, and also tunnels are becoming, now we're going to see more of conversation around tunnels because people started to feel like that wasn't quite a clear sense of safety and just walking through the tunnels. Yet, you know, in the winter, sometimes they could be very, very useful. Education is not connected to the tunnel system, so I kind of haven't had a lot of interaction with the tunnels, but then once I started through this project walking through the tunnels, I'm realizing yeah, this could be a little bit overwhelming for women in particular if you want to make sure that they're having a safe space and can use those tunnels without issue. This next person is trans, non-binary, queer, neurodiverse. And so this person talks about the virtual classrooms that we've been having on campus as being positive, and it's just because they can now accentuate their pronouns in their Zoom classrooms, which has been hard to get in the in-person format because people just default to misgenders this student. And they talk about how if something really bad happens, then they would report it. They take that seriously. But otherwise, like little microaggressions, there's no point. They happen all the time. And it's too draining to deal with all of them. And I wasn't terribly surprised because any type of justice-oriented project is always have people start sharing their experiences, even if there's a little connection to space. But space provoked conversation, a deep conversation with these students. And then I'm learning more about, well, why can't you report your microaggressions? Why isn't the instructor teaching about microaggressions in general? Or where is that happening on campus, that kind of dialogue? So I'd like to think that this could be a useful so-called space or intervention here that we could start talking about microaggressions in the virtual and in-person formats and such, because I think they're having an impact on student life. Here the student took apart another map with U of M, and you can see through the arrows that I'm pointing here that there's a real emphasis here on the green aspects of campus. And the student did not know that there was a whole other park that's happening at the south end of campus, but wanted to engage in that, enhance that more, as well as the quiet space. And that would certainly appease to their neurodiversity to have that kind of calmness so that they can kind of regather their thoughts and kind of get back into it. Because the campus could be very overwhelming. It's very, very large. And so that's some ideas to put forward. So recommendations on the map is that the trans-inclusive bathrooms. Now we do, University of Manitoba now has a site for LGBTQ students to access so they can learn about these different bathrooms and the different resources, which has been fabulous. But as you just saw on the original map, trans-inclusive bathrooms are not there. Trans bathrooms are not they shouldn't really be across from the cisgender bathrooms because that places trans people at risk. People have felt that as soon as they use the trans bathroom or gender inclusive bathroom, they come out, they're going to be targeted from other people who have transphobic values. So to move that bathroom, it would be really ideal. Having more problem-solving staff, so that they engage with faculty or staff about the problems that they're having, dealing with space, that there could be some sort of work toward resolving those issues. An updated social media space. And again, we're on the right path with our new LGBT site, but I think more social media space would be really helpful, more green space. A physical map of the building would be helpful as well, so that students can, especially new students to the campus, can kind of find their way. And also learn from hospitals for direct signage. That was really an important point from this participant, that you seem to kind of know where you're going with the hospital. Like when I go to Health Sciences Center, I know I'm following the green bear. I'm following the orange owl, and I'm on a move. That would be helpful, and maybe we could look at that kind of direction. And this was interesting also, a market to bring people together. And we know that food, and research is very clear that food bonds and connects people, and they bring them together. And that's why whenever you have a party, a lot of people just gravitate in the kitchen. And you're like, oh, I did a nice spread in the living room, but you're on the kitchen. It's because they're naturally drawn to food, and that's where people are connecting to one another. And the last person I would like to highlight is racialized female. Again, this person talked about how there was something that they didn't realize there was a park, and they felt the park would be really useful to have. So this theme kept coming up, and maybe more signage around the park, just so that people can go and sit down. And also, this person at another university noticed that they had an outside table, like a dining room tent, where people can be outside, enjoy the greenery, but also enjoy lunch together. And that was a really, they felt that university did a good job of that, and we'd love to see that U of M as well, because there you're not sitting with just your people within your own discipline area. You're also speaking with people from different disciplines altogether and learning more about what their school experience has been like. And again, the tunnels came up as not feeling safe going through the tunnels. So this person here actually drew on the map of the dining hall that she would like to see constructed on campus, and where people can come together. And this person made a point that saying that lunches were also discounted for people who couldn't afford to buy a lunch. And then they would bring their lunch to the dining hall, which with the new outside dining hall. So I'm not too sure how the dining hall would work in the middle of winter, but but for us, we have warm, lovely summers and springs and fall. So I think that there's a chance that maybe something temporary could be constructed in some ways. So more signage, more outside dining hall, inexpensive meals, and more lights and cameras around at night to help alleviate safety concerns as being a female. I had a participant also who's not featured here, but a participant who's female with a disability, and she sits in her car until the handy transit shows up at her car to take her to her building, because she's too afraid to sit outside her car, just to stand outside her car or go to a lighted building. She's too afraid to make that walk through the parking lot. And I think that's an important piece here, that we have to have more lights and cameras on campus, realizing the security concerns around that, and that could be political to some degree. So preliminary findings from U of M, that they're looking for more quiet and more green spaces to cope with busy and noisy environments. They're looking for more focused on wellness and safety. They want to have more diverse signage, so see themselves reflected in signage and images around the campus, and also more consultation involved through the design stages, all through from start to finish, just so that they can kind of help make sure that each of those spaces are being constructed are just being meaningful and useful to their different identity groups. So if you're going to teach for spatial justice, what could you do? I think there's some different ways. You can go through, have a broader conversation and awareness into the campus classroom that you're teaching in right here, and think about seriously how the space is influencing identities and experiences. You can also conduct a spatial analysis of your surroundings. So this is, again, you're walking through, you're looking at the design features of the space, what is lacking, what is strong, what's helpful, what's positive, as well as what needs some more work. And then through that, you're advocating for changes to the physical and virtual structure. There are some of my the participants had wanted to tear down this building, it doesn't work. That would be maybe ideal in some worlds, but also looking at financial means and sustainability issues, maybe that might not be the best approach, but perhaps we can look at changing to make it more accessible, safety, and more develop a sense of belonging within all of our buildings. And teach and have an awareness that space means that everyone will experience it differently. And so therefore, take a walk through that space several times. Imagine what someone who's queer could experience, who's of a Black background how they would experience it differently. So to consider all that. And also, I know central administration, I don't want to excuse them from this pedagogy. They have an important role as well in making sure that instructor and student voices, particularly those from multiply marginalized backgrounds, are in the planning of campus spaces. So I think I'll end there, but I have some findings. So we're still wondering about how this all compares with U of Winnipeg and Brandon's data. We're looking about how do we make more space prominent within EDI politics, programs, and policies, and what's the value where do we go with this space issue, and what could we adapt and incorporate in our pedagogy a little further? So I think I'll end right there. And you can see my website. You can join me on Twitter if you like, and also you can write me as well for further dialogue. But I think this is something we're just starting off, and I think hopefully it'll have contribute something meaningful to the conversation around EDI. Thank you very much.
If anybody has any questions?
You mentioned being in Spain. Are they doing similar projects in Spain, similar research about spatial places?
No, because of the pandemic, I didn't go back. And so I am, so right now we're just focusing on the campuses, the 3 universities. And what we are trying to do at the end is that we hope to create a video around this work, such as this one, so that other people can start exploring space more prominently and prioritize space in their equity, diversity, and inclusion work. So that's where it is. So short answer, no. I couldn't, love to. but it's really, I want to focus more on Canadian context this time.
This was absolutely fascinating, and I want you to realize you're speaking to a crowd of people that graduated a long time ago. And even then, those tunnels were scary. I would avoid them at any cost, even when it's 30 below. So I'm really interested. It's fascinating, your research, and I wish you would have done it 40 years ago, to be quite honest. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm not too sure people would listen to me 40 years ago on this topic. Because the EDI work has moved forward, I think that's given me a window to say. But I appreciate that. Even me, my undergraduate is at the University of Windsor. We had tunnels. We stayed clear of the tunnels. Everyone did, because of possible dangers and violence that could happen with it. And the university had to end up shutting them down. Go ahead. Sorry, there's another question.
Yeah, tunnels have been lost in the old municipal hospital, have been lost in health sciences, have been lost in Red River. I don't need to be neurodiverse or anything. I'm just lost. I hate them. Which brings me to my question. Did you have any deaf participants? I'm trying to picture getting through those tunnels if you can't communicate with somebody and say, where am I?
That's a great point. We did not have deaf participants, but those participants who had a disability studies background, they spoke to the range of diversities around disabilities, and that's what prompted the physical map should be posted in the building so that people who may be deaf can consult with that. There was actually a participant who talked about how, interesting, there was an interpreter in the classroom that helped interpret academic language. And I thought that's very interesting and they thought that was a very useful approach to at least helping students realize some of the tougher language academics bring, and then help them translate that and interpret that word correctly and those concepts. And that only happened once to that student, and thought it was a fabulous approach. But we do provide interpretation, of course, in our classrooms for deaf students. But I think, as you're pointing out, there's a broader student experience here to consider, where interpreters can't simply be on standby to help with deaf interpretation along the way. So thanks for that point.
And to our Zoom participants, no other questions?
Everyone's thinking. Probably everyone's looking around their rooms now. Yeah. Their classroom.
I have a question for
Sure.
you. So you said that you're still delving through the data for Brand University and U of W, and as you pointed out in that last slide, U of W being a very urban downtown campus and Brandon being a rural area. So is there anything you can share at this point, or things that you can anticipate that would be, like University of Manitoba is an interesting combination kind of the both, and then you have Brand University and U of W being very different.
Yes.
So what sorts of differences or similarities are you anticipating?
I've already completed the equity, diversity, inclusion practitioner research with those other 2 campuses. So what already came up with U of W was more safety concerns being a downtown campus. So I'm expecting that will kind of come a little bit further through in that data. The Brandon University practitioners spoke about the diversity they have is really from international students. And so there's another layer there around language, around just being Black in Brandon, being trying to adjust to living in Canada, the cold weather if you're coming in from Nigeria, like those types of things. So I expect there'll be, from Brandon, there'll be more conversation around belonging, I think, because of the demographics of currently where Brandon is situated. If that makes sense. Yeah.
Haven't been in the buildings in the U of M for quite some time, but I was wondering when you walk into the front entrance of any of the buildings, if there could be a map like you would see in the mall saying you are here and and they could put on it where the washrooms are, where the library is, and the different classrooms. And I thought that might be helpful for anybody coming into the buildings.
Yeah, absolutely. And it brings back that need for a physical map in all the buildings where people can see where things go. Because, especially again, if you're new to the campus, you don't know. So perhaps, as you go through the halls, as one participant says, 5 or 6 times a day, you will learn. But I think for us, as alumni coming back, you may need to have that refresher because also design features change within a building too. So there's new offices popping up, and even when I came back from the pandemic in person, our Faculty of Education has new rooms I've never seen before, which looks lovely. You should check out our new Indigenous learning space, for example. So I think it's a brilliant point, and to have that map just laid out on every building as a starting point, and be inclusive in that approach.
Does Physical Plant know about your research? As the builders of and the designers of signage, right?
Yeah, I haven't got any letters, so I don't think they do. I'm more than welcome to engage with them and to help them thinking through, particularly if they're ever at a stage where they need to change. That consultation needs to happen, but I also could direct them to students who are living their lives in those buildings, and hopefully they can also provide some input too. But yes, so happy to engage.
Any last final questions? No? All right, well, thank you again, Dr. Mizzi, for that really engaging discussion. And if any of you do have any comments or last questions, I'm sure if they can come up to you at the end, that would be great. So as I said, today is our final session of this series. And so we hadn't been sending you a survey every week, but we're going to send you one after today, because we do want to get your feedback on future topics, speakers. Also, we really want to understand your thoughts on format, timing, time of day, frequency, all those sorts of things, cost even. So looking as to how we can plan for 2023. The other thing we'll be doing more sharing of is that while we host this Learning for Life series, there are other things that are going on at the University of Manitoba. And I have heard from members who've attended this group who've said, I really would like a go-to hub, if you will, of things that are going on. So there's a lot of great lectures, webinars, just a variety of different events that are going on. So we will make sure to continue to share those as well. So you can learn from more of the University of Manitoba's experts. So with that, have a wonderful day. Thank you for your continued participation. I love seeing you every week, every other week when we hosted these. And we will see you again in 2023. Thank you.